Yeah, my way from Norway to Israel was a bit more complex than in pre-COVID times, but I made it. Some paperwork, some let's say extra organizing, extra nerves, and I'm on this stage. Woo! Yes. So let's talk about status of Angular today. My talk will have two parts. First, we'll check what's going on with relationship Angular and community. How can we help each other? And of course, I will introduce not all the, but majority of noticeable updates we have in the very recent version of our favorite framework, Angular. So this will be the second part of my session. About myself, I'm a big fan of the developer communities, of the developer conferences. I run meetups and conferences in Norway where I live. Maybe some from you were attendees, or maybe even speakers at ngVikings conference. I organized with my friends. Yeah, I see some hands. ngVikings, who been there? Woo! Yeah, good. We took break for COVID, but yeah, we have plans to run next ngVikings somewhere, when we travel from country to country within Nordics so far. So we'll be super happy to see you there and the dates. How to know the date of next ngVikings conference? Well, the simplest is just to follow my Twitter, WebMaxRU. I tweet mainly about web platform, Angular, progressive web apps, and a bit about cloud. And by the way, I stream these slides directly from network, and I will share the link to this particular slide deck, which contains lots of useful links right after my session. And I will tweet about this, so please let's stay connected on Twitter. This is a very good idea. Yeah, about my Angular history, I realized that I use AngularJS by those years since 1.1.4. Maybe it happened around 8-9 years ago when I first tried Angular in action. Okay, to motivate you a bit, some numbers, some stats about Angular. I'm not big fan of going through, these comparisons of the frameworks, which is popular, which is not. But still, sometimes it's good to, let's say, make this sanity check and to go outside of our bubble to check what's going on in outer world. There is quite a well-known survey called State of JS, which where around 23,000 developers participated in 2020. So hopefully data for 2021 is coming soon. So what do we see here? Angular is second framework by current usage. That's not bad at all, I'd say. Another criteria called interest. It's folks who do not use this particular technology but interested in learning this. And what we see here, majority of these big frameworks have some drop in the numbers. I think this is connected with the fact that we have something cool and new in web frontend every single week. And there is a joke like, which framework I'm going to use now? Of course, framework of the day. So you see, it's not a big surprise here. We have more, let's say, data-driven or real data-driven parameters like number of questions on Stack Overflow. And here, if it's too small, this picture, I can say that Angular is the orange or dark yellow line. It's around 250,000 in absolute numbers, and you see that both Angular and Vue got to kind of plateau of similar number of questions per month. Yeah, this is questions per month. And for some reason there is, in the very end of React, there is a serious drop. Whatever that means, I don't know. And also Angular is famous for its officially documented most dramatic surge of the questions on Stack Overflow. You see, this is a real cliff. And of course that happened when Angular 2 was introduced. Same, Stack Overflow has its own survey. It's so popular to have surveys these days. And Angular is number 4 in most wanted frameworks. It's, again, folks who do not use this technology but want to learn about this, want to start using this. And it's quite popular among professional developers. But you see, line number 2, jQuery still has super strong position. So jQuery is here to stay. Maybe, I don't know, is there a jQuery conference in the world? If not, this is business idea for you folks. Angular and community. Angular and all of us. Let's scroll through this synergy. What do we give to each other? So first, what Angular gives to community? Obviously, framework itself, right? It's awesome, it's amazing, it's well supported, and with quite open license, right? We can use it both for commercial and non-commercial projects, and numbers of downloads of the core components on NPM are quite, let's say, exciting. It went from 1.4 million to well over 2 million in around 1.5 years. And this is, by the way, about weekly downloads. And on GitHub, you'll find over 2 million projects based on Angular. By the way, when I delivered similar session for Angular 12 release this summer, the number of projects was 1.8 million. So it's growing with quite good pace. And of course, still, these are all public numbers, and it's really top of the iceberg. We know that Angular is heavily used in enterprise, and they have their own like repos and all these registries of the package. So of course, we do not see all the numbers, which are way higher than represented. And is this real synergy? Is this real collaboration? So Angular gives us a lot. What do we give to Angular? And how can we make sure that this relationship is somehow sustainable? So folks who build Angular will not say one day, we are enough, we don't see support from your side, maybe we are good to somehow close the project. No worries. How can we contribute? Feedback in very different forms. Of course, it could be very explicit one, like your comments, like issues on GitHub repo, and like implicit ones, like your articles, your videos you create about Angular, and even your tweets are a valuable source of the feedback. Core development, and in a few slides forward, you'll see that some important parts of Angular are developed by community contributors, not core Angular team, not Googlers, but just folks who want to have this or that feature. Lots of examples with that. And of course, ecosystem. We build libraries, we build packages for other folks to use, and I believe including the Angular team itself, including Google itself. And by the way, Google have their core projects based on Angular, related to cloud, related to their advertising network. So yeah, it's quite well, let's say, integrated into this software ecosystem. So how to start contributing? Like very obvious, very first steps for those of you who maybe consider this but don't know how to start. Super simplest option is contribute to the documentation, and you don't even need to write particular pieces of the documentation. You can review the documentation, and there is awesome content contributor guide on angular.io, and like every page of the documentation websites, it has this pencil icon where you can click and provide your like own review in terms of, for example, you can just change the date when it was reviewed. So Angular team strives to have all, like every single page of the documentation reviewed at least every half a year or with every major release. So you just read the documentation. If that looks good for you, nothing obsolete, nothing outdated, nothing wrong, you just change the date and saying here, yeah, it looks good, I reviewed this, that's fine. Also, another simple way to contribute is the same documentation page. They have meta field with keywords for search. Of course, internal search system for this docs section try to like scan all words in the documentation, but you can help with providing explicit search keywords. And maybe some keywords are not even mentioned in the documentation itself or somehow implicitly mentioned. So yes, please provide this. Or feature, new feature, we all want to have something else, something more added to Angular, right? So submitting your feature request could be good help for Angular team. Of course, before submission, please go through contributor's guide to understand how to create not something noisy, but a proper submission, some discipline required, and your submission will not be ignored. Angular, some like few versions ago, maybe like few years ago, was somehow blamed for ignoring thousands of issues created on their repo. Not anymore. Team did nice homework, learned the lesson, and in around 2 years they went from thousands open issues to hundreds. Of course, they you can imagine it's quite a tremendous job on going through the thousands of submissions, and they introduced quite formal, which is good in that sense, way to go through these submissions. So, and actually they adopted this schema from my colleagues who build VS Code editor. It's just a battle-tested, well recommended scheme for large open source project, how to deal with these thousands of issues you receive like monthly or weekly. So how does it work? You submit feature request, and someone from Angular team marks this. Is it issue or feature request? This is manual work, of course. Then your comment, your issue is staying for 60 days if it's marked like a feature request, and if it gathers enough thumbs up from the dev community. So now it's 20, but maybe this number will tune somehow. It goes next steps. If not, this automatically closed. And then, what happens next? On this popular feature request, Angular team does next chunk of their work and try to understand, does it align with the general direction of Angular development? Because of course there are many feature requests which are like completely out of scope in that sense, and unfortunately most likely they will not be implemented. But if yes, it's marked as prioritized, and sooner or later you will see this in production. And you can help with implementing these features. So we are closing to the next part of our presentation about new versions. So these are just a few examples of what folks from community contributed to the new version. We'll go through some of them in a bit more details, but this is fact. You can take part in core development of the framework. After all, what's new in the latest version of Angular? That was released 4 or 5 days ago. So this slide deck is absolutely fresh and new, this part of it. So, who can tell me the version of latest Angular?
13.
Yes, you are right, 13. Yeah, I know that in many cultures this number is not very good, right? So we'll see how that works For Angular, at least what I see from the new features looks very promising. Okay, like in every major release of Angular, there are a bunch of sections where we have updates. Version 13 is not an exception, so maybe let's start with something that can, let's say, break your application, because it definitely introduces breaking changes, and I'm talking about removals of some features, removals of some functionality in version 13. Why do we need to remove some pieces of this or that framework or library from time to time? Well, it's really inevitable. We have to do this because we really want to have better developer experience, and in that sense we are talking about some simpler approach to how we build applications to avoid this hassle with you know, thinking about some outdated stuff. And for the framework itself, it's super important to keep up with web standards. Web standards are evolving, web is evolving, and we definitely don't want to have Angular stale somehow on its particular level of the development. So, talking about concrete removals, and of course, folks, removal is not happening like unexpectedly, right? According the schema Angular team adopted, and I believe it's very general for many similar projects. First, these removals are part of deprecations, and on my previous session about Angular 12 release, these two pieces I want to introduce now were deprecated. Now they are removed, and we can start with removal of Internet Explorer 11 support. Finally. What does it mean for Angular developers and the Angular team and Angular as a framework? We can now use all the latest and greatest features of web, like CSS variables, like web animations and tons of other cool stuff. What's even more important, we are now on like this evergreen road, right? So we can adopt new features without too much worrying about that. And of course, for framework became lighter. That means faster, no more polyfills, no more differential loading for IE 11. It directly improves user experience. And second removal is View Engine. Was also, yeah, maybe it's not super that exciting, right? But still, it's a serious step, and yeah, maybe you know, starting from this release, we will start to forget name Ivy, because why to call render engine somehow if it's just a default renderer, right? So it's just a default fast rendering engine for Angular. Yeah, this change was also very well, let's say, prepared. Lots of preparations. Still, some parts of Angular compatibility compiler make sense for library authors, but yeah, framework became lighter, faster, and better. Lots of improvements for us, for developers, for better developer experience, and this is the list. So about APIs, like better is not very strong word, right? So we'll go a bit more detailed on these API changes for Angular Service Worker, for Angular components, and for forms. Documentation, very important part. Just a reminder that you can take active part in reviewing and making documentation better. Very crucial pieces of applications are now, like how we build applications are now better documented, about internationalization and localization. By the way, this tag handler $sign localization is actually in Angular for over a year. Of course, this is very important part of Ivy as a renderer, but there was no documentation about this, or at least nice documentation. Now it's part of official docs. Yeah, bump up of the core versions of libraries we actively use as a part of our development flow. TypeScript, RxJS, that means that we can use all the latest and greatest features of this core libs. And more automations for us developers to, let's say, have better feeling while we build our application, so it's more delightful, the whole process of coding, and it directly contributes to performance. Performance is a very general word, right? And here I mean exactly coding time, when we really build the application. To experience all these new automations, please make sure that you have latest version of Angular language service. If you use this as an extension for VS Code, just to make sure that it's number 13. And what do you get there? I believe this is most exciting part, when you have optional chaining added automatically for you for these properties that are nullable. Isn't that cool? I think this is just amazing, and this is only one example. And also you have better autocomplete for properties and methods. And yeah, by the way, this is a contribution from community. It's not delivered to Angular by its core team. Next, runtime, performance, of course, yes, I already mentioned that framework became lighter because of this quite significant removals of functionality, i.e. 11, Vue engine, and also like small detail added. I really love attention to the small details in Angular. Now Adobe fonts are also inlined in addition to Google fonts. Yeah, maybe this is a bit niche thing, but still might be very relevant for parts of dev community. And build time, it's a serious performance improvement. I will illustrate this by a couple of next slides. But before, how do we update Angular? By the way, folks, anybody in the room who already updated to version 13 their, I don't know, pet projects, side projects? Yeah, quite a few, so I see at least 4 hands. Brave people, let's give a round of applause. Yeah, it all should happen without any, let's say, pain points. Angular team works a lot on streamlining this update process, and at update.angular.io you will always find the latest instructions. And yeah, maybe, I bet you've seen this page where you check some checkboxes like how complex is your project, and you get set of instructions you recommended to run. If you also use Angular material, you can run this command as well. And for my blog project, the results are following. So it was version 12 to version 13. Yeah, if that's too small, I can say that the bundle size, or like overall application size, went from 814 kilobytes to 733. I did nothing, I ran 2 commands. Isn't that cool? My application became lighter, faster. Great job, Angular team. But this is not the end of this story. If we take the same screenshot from version 13 and run the build second time, I introduced some small change. It was really small, so the bundle size even remained the same, approximation. What changed? Speed of the build. That's because Angular introduced so-called persistent build change by default. Now we will find .angular/cache folder in your project. I believe it was introduced as opt-in in the previous version. Now it's by default. Well, some parts of build flow, they produce some artifacts that safely can be, let's say, persistently cached. It's a bit controversial, right? Cache and persistent. So it's like different things, but now this combination gives nice results. I illustrate this Angular JSON addition. It's for those who do not start a fresh project with Angular 13, but upgrade their previous version. So you just have to add a few lines into your Angular configuration file. Most often questions about this persistent cache, because yeah, it might sound a bit confusing. Should I check these artifacts in? No, it's cache after all. Please keep it only on your local machine. And second question, is this so longly awaited differential loading? No, it's different thing. It's really like caching of some build artifacts. Okay, forms. Of course, you hardly find any project from modern framework live without forms in this or that view, and some improvements here. Now we can enable, disable validators on the fly, like dynamically, and this is also contribution from the community. And stricter types for the form controls. A new type form control status was introduced. Be very careful, it might introduce like small breaking change, small I mean for very small number of the project that use, let's say, some internal things with the form. It's relatively small update, but I believe this is first step to huge potential update, which might happen in one of the next versions, about typed reactive forms. And by the way, this is a link to public, let's say, discussion about how to build this particular API. Because this is something that might, let's say, change the way we think about forms quite dramatically. And remember, folks, that to have all these links from the slides, just follow me on Twitter. You'll find all the I'll post a link to this slide deck shortly after I go from this stage. Accessibility improvements, quite a few. Yeah, of course, it's also directly related to form controls, right? And of course, we have to care about accessibility as developers ourselves, but in a very large extent, Angular team does this for us just by introducing some change which will automatically add to our project right after we update to the next version. So I can name optimized view for optimized styles for high contrast mode, better target sizes for some controls to be more touch friendly, multiple additions related to how we track focus, how we set focus automatically, and lots of corrections, updates, additions to area concept. And what's really cool, folks from Angular team, they do this change both in, let's say, classical components which we use now, and based on MDC, which is coming maybe in the next version based on, so MDC is material design controls based on the latest and greatest standards. Now they are experimental in Angular, but we'll see where that goes. And many more improvements to APIs. Angular Service Worker became more ergonomic. Now, like, instead of listening to observable about updates, you can just get result from the promise. Also community contribution. Simpler creation of dynamic components in Angular, very well streamlined, better APIs with the router. Also, there are, I believe, quite a few contributions from community to that area. Better, like faster, better is isolated tests. And thanks to removal of view engine, we have Angular package format modernized and streamlined. What's next? I here listed my top 3 features I personally wait from Angular, from Angular team. Maybe some of you also can't wait when this show up in the framework. Standalone components, ng modules have to go away sooner or later. Is that anybody agree in the room? And folks, today, exactly today, is the date when they close RFC, request for comments related to this. So again, on this version of slide deck, this is a link going straight to the issue when they introduced API for this, and it's huge, long thread of the comments from dev community. If you have your own strong opinions, today is the last chance. Next. I heard rumors about Angular 14 will switch to MDC components. Maybe this will be, not visually very noticed difference, but under the hood, Angular material will be more or less rewritten from scratch, again to follow the latest and greatest updates from material design concept, which is evolving, by the way. I remember that maybe in 2016 I introduced, I had technical sessions where I introduced Angular material design components, and it was completely different from what we have now. And strongly typed form. I already told that first small steps are there. To sum up, Angular is here to stay. The collaboration between Angular team, Google community is sustainable, and it's a win-win-win-win-win for all the parties. Angular is heavily relied on community, on all of us. You are super welcome to send your contributions. I explained multiple ways. And version 13, regardless, this particular number is really awesome. Try to update it today, and if you wish to host it somewhere, just consider looking at the cloud offering from Azure. We introduced Azure Static Web Apps this summer, so maybe that might be something interesting for you with quite generous free tier. On that, thank you very much. Yes.